Today is about autism, Autism Day. What is autism? And well, we're going to find out soon because my next guest is going to talk all about autism and why autism is so important to talk about. Yeah, we don't want to brush it under the rug. We don't want to not talk about it because we do want to talk about it. It affects everybody's life in so many ways, especially people with autism. And oh, I say the word autism so many times at the beginning, but you know what? My next guest is going to be talking about autism. So stay tuned. Hello, everyone, and welcome to PWD Allies podcast. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Brent Frayne. I'm the host. Today is all about autism, Autism Day. It's a little early for the Autism Day, but this is the day that we are going to be talking about it. And I guess the best person to talk about Autism Day would be my guest, Peter Cunnington. Hello, Peter. Hello. Thanks for joining me on the show today.
Yeah, good to have you.
Yeah, welcome. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Hello?
I why don't we start Peter with we can actually start with the thumbnail that I had posted earlier.
Mhm.
Let's start there. The thumbnail I had posted earlier with the puzzle
Mhm.
piece
Right?
or the puzzle pieces.
Mhm.
And you told me that I shouldn't be posting that image. Let's start there.
Okay.
You can tell our listeners why the puzzle pieces that people with autism have been walking back from that particular image.
Mhm.
All right. Okay. Well, I'll start by saying that in a couple days, April 2nd, that's Worldwide Autism Day. It used to be called Worldwide Autism Awareness Day. Some people may still refer to it as that.
Mhm.
And it was started mostly by an autism organization that claimed to help people with autism called Autism Speaks. And they used to have one in Canada, but that collapsed because of the lack of support and the backlash. And the backlash basically stems from the fact that they don't actually want to help people with autism. They want to like cure people with autism.
Oh.
So
Hmm.
basically, the goal was to spend a lot of money on research and funding to basically prevent anyone from ever even having autism in the first place. Or way back in the day, they used to do horrible stuff like electroshock therapies and a whole bunch of really dangerous practices that never worked.
Mhm.
And so, and they have a puzzle piece that was blue. Now, that is because they've since moved their puzzle piece to a more colors that like sort of a blending of colors,
More like a
which I really don't
rainbow,
inclusive.
yeah.
Rainbow.
But the reason it was blue and the reason it was puzzle pieces, they claim that people with autism are like missing a piece of their puzzle, like they're
Mhm.
incomplete. They're not like a whole person. They're
Oh.
Mhm.
somehow missing something. So the normal people need to like help them to fill in their missing pieces.
Oh.
Right.
And the other reason it was blue was because the original people who diagnosed autism in the first place were only looking at boys. They weren't looking at girls. So they
Oh.
blew the
Oh.
boys' color. And so they
Hmm.
just said, well, boys are blue. We're going to go with blue. And they didn't even think about girls. And
Hmm.
so that they just completely left out a massive portion of the autism community.
That's terrible.
And yeah, and that was just terrible and horrible. And yeah.
Yeah, and it's seclusion, right? It's being selective on different population, right? It's saying, oh, well, it's just boys or just men that have autism. Girls or women, no, they don't have autism. Oh, no, no. I mean, it can happen to anybody born that way, and the society has to just work with the situation, work with the people. You can't just cure. I mean, there's no
Yeah.
cure for
Well,
it.
Yeah.
again, it's interesting that you mentioned the boys thing because
Yeah,
I didn't know that either. But
I didn't know that.
I was telling you before the show when I was looking for images to use for the
Right.
thumbnail, the only images that were coming up were puzzle pieces. And that was
Hmm.
number one. There was like 40 or 50 images of puzzle pieces. So according to Google, still,
Oh,
the puzzle pieces is the image to use.
oh, oh,
Plus, when I also looked up images, the the only images that were coming up were like boys playing with cars. Like so
Oh,
you're right. Like it seemed to be predominantly talking about boys. Like
like, yeah.
yeah, so if I was looking, if I typed in autism, it was either the puzzle piece or pictures of boys playing with cars. And so
Mhm.
it's really interesting that those images are still kind of pervasive, and you're quite right. I mean, I can understand why people would take offense to that, to say that you're incomplete or
Well,
that
it's
it
misleading.
doesn't affect girls or something. Yeah.
I mean, it's so
yeah,
misleading, Peter, when then society will they'll believe it. Like, I mean, because hey, well, when Google says that, I mean, usually a lot of it's pretty accurate information in certain ways. But looking at how like Neil punched in about the graph, well, it comes up with that, and people will think, okay, well, that's what it is. I mean, it must be right, right? I mean, that's like in a comparison. I mean, this show's all about autism, but I'm just going to quickly use it as a comparison for one quick moment here and
yeah,
get your take on this, Peter. That's
yeah.
like in Google. Now, a lot of our viewers and listeners, everyone's familiar with Google. I mean, a lot of it's AI generated, or if it's iPhone, they'll type in it's all AI stuff. Well, it comes up with a lot of it accurate, but some of it's misleading. So
Mhm.
here's the kind of a simile of basically what when you do a search for something, you punch in and it says why hasn't the BC government raised disability rates? Well, right away AI comes up. Oh, the government has raised rates 5 times since 2017. I mean, that's misleading, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, it's
so
technically true, but the amount is so insignificant that it barely counts as anything.
right, and especially when they use the word significant, it's not significant.
But it's
I
just
guess it's
interesting that
that.
Google itself is basically a mouthpiece for the government,
Yeah,
repeating the same nonsense. Well, the government says this, so I'll repeat it the same thing too. Yeah.
yeah, but when I mentioned like
Yeah.
selective, like on their selective wording on how they come up with that, it's like selective of like autism. It's like selective of saying, well, it's just boys and men's. It's not girls and women. It's like
Mhm.
Yeah.
that selective category. It's like saying, well, all PWD majority live in subsidized housing. Well, no, they don't. I mean, there's a portion, but a lot of them pay market rent. And so yeah, it's that kind of
Mhm.
that comparison, and I don't like using that comparison on PWD this and that, but it's just with this one scenario, I'm kind of looking at that going, wow, like yeah,
Yeah,
Mhm.
it really, they, yeah, it's really because it's been so long. Now, what other organizations? There are some other organizations outside of Autism Speaks who
hmm
are trying to are kind of rising up. One of them would be called ASAN. Well, that's in the States. It's called Autism Self Advocacy Network. And
okay,
Mhm.
instead of it being run by professionals who have no autism, it's actually run by actual autistics.
hmm
And so some people are either using, instead of the puzzle piece, they're using like an infinity symbol, sometimes a rainbow or
Right.
gold. So there's a lot of like different organizations trying like other ideas instead of the puzzle piece. And
hmm
so
Mhm.
that is, but it's not kind of as big yet because they don't have the funding that Autism Speaks has.
Yeah.
And in Canada, it's not even worse because we're trying to get it going, but it's hard to get it going without funding. So
Yeah.
the funding definitely needs to be there. I totally echo that, and I mean, you put the resources in, the government puts the resources in, it actually helps to get a better understanding on autism, right? I mean, it's like rather than brush it under the carpet and not.
Mhm.
Yeah. What's your view on that, Peter? I mean, would you like to see the provincial or federal like counterparts getting a funding program?
for sure. In fact, I don't know if you're aware of this, but I was diagnosed. I'll tell you a little. Can I quickly tell you a little about how I got diagnosed?
Sure.
Sure.
So when I was a kid, like I think I was about 8 years old, I got diagnosed first with ADHD, and
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
I pretty sure I still have that too. And then later, when I was about 15, 14, 15, I went to a place in Victoria called Queen Alexander. It's a children's hospital place that deals with like neurological developmental stuff. And they not like medical stuff. It's like different than that. But they deal and they have programs. And I was going there, and a man who doesn't work there anymore, really great man. Like his name was Rob Lampard or something. I don't remember. But he thought, oh, he might have autism. So they did a couple days examination on me and determined, yeah. Well, first they said this is something important to know. They said I was specifically diagnosed with what's called Asperger's syndrome. Now, since recently, the DSM has folded they have folded Asperger's syndrome into the autism. So now instead of it being Asperger's or autism, they folded them in. So it's now autism spectrum disorder. So you have it's two reasons they did that. Was one is it was confusing because like you have Asperger's, you have autism. What's the difference? Confusing. And the other part was would do with funding. Like they would say, well, we only fund autism. Well, you have Asperger's. It's like, but that's basically autism. It's like, so they just gave up and they just folded the whole thing together. And so I was diagnosed with Asperger's, and now I just go by autism spectrum. And yeah, I went to this program at QA, and then I met a whole bunch of other people at a monthly meetup kind of thing at the Queen Alexander who also had autism. And that was the first time I kind of met anyone else with like, I mean, there might have been other people with autism that I knew, but I didn't really like associate with them that much. And then later I joined an adults group. But you're talking about funding. Unfortunately, the government doesn't provide any funding to pay for a diagnosis after the age of 18. If you don't get diagnosed pre-18 years old, you have to pay for yourself, and it can be upwards in the $3,000 or $4,000 range. And
wow.
90% of most people with autism are living probably on low income or disability, and they have no funding to cover the cost of a diagnosis. It's starting to change. Some people are starting to work on this, but and so unfortunately also there really isn't any. The only really funding you can get when you turn 18 is probably going on disability. Most of the programs are for children because that's where the money is allotted. For the government allots the money to children and families. But when you turn 18, those programs are like you age out of them. You age out, and there is one group in Victoria called the Autism Meetup Group, run by another woman named Iris Gray. Sometimes she goes by Rainbow. And we meet casually at a coffee shop in Victoria. But that's like it. That's like the only adults group to meet any other adults. But it's not even a government thing. It's just a casual meetup. She just decided to do it because most people with autism live very quiet lives and never meet anyone else because there's nowhere to go. There's no places. So yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I had a couple guests on last year, Peter, and they have autism themselves, and they moved to Winnipeg, Manitoba. But I had them on, and they lived under CMHC, through housing, through the branch off of BC Housing, but CMHC, Community Living BC. And they definitely felt the same thing that you mentioned, like feeling very secluded, no groups to go to, like to talk with, and there's no funding. And so definitely I'm gonna also look and see if I can somehow connect you up with them, and maybe they can maybe branch and give you some ideas. I don't know if they have any ideas.
Sure. Yeah.
I know they want to go back to Victoria eventually, but of course, finding affordable housing is literally impossible, especially on PPP rates and $500 shelter. I mean, that's not happening, right? So,
I was wondering, Peter, how do you get assessed? Like how like we always talk about like if you're on PWD, you call it getting medically assessed, right? To get on PWD. So how do you get medically assessed with autism? Like, what kinds of things do they do to determine that?
Well, autism is a neurological disability, similar to something like a Down syndrome or like a brain injury or something like that. So it's also a spectrum. So now to get diagnosed, I you do there's a bunch of different ways, but you would do a couple. Usually, it's a day or two of assessment with a doctor. What I did is a couple days with this doctor at Queen Alexander, and he just did a bunch of questions about like my social skills, like my interaction with other people, and how I act with other people. That's really what affects it. It
Mhm.
sometimes it's like it's not really like it's a learning disability per se. A lot of people have a lot of comorbid things that go with it, like depression or
Mhm.
learning differences. So they don't learn in the same way, or sometimes they even learn better, like they learn more brighter, but in a different
Mhm.
way. Like there was
Yeah.
a very brilliant young man named Jake Barnett, and he went to university literally at 8 years old because
Oh, wow.
but he couldn't even tie his own shoe. Like
Huh.
he didn't know how to tie his own shoe, so he lacked the motor skills to tie a shoe. But he was so brilliant in the mind with numbers that he could
Mhm.
do pi up to like 300 digits or something.
Oh,
And
wow.
but he lacked like motor skills, and so it was very hard to diagnose him. They said he was not going to ever talk. They said he was going to be like in a nursing home or a care home for the rest of his life because
Mm,
Mhm.
they saw they only focused on one aspect.
yeah.
That's kind of what they generally like to focus on is how you interact, your skills, your life skills, and they will. But again, if you're an adult, it's very hard to find like a therapist. You have to find a therapist, and that
Mm,
requires a doctor. And of course, as you
Mhm.
know, BC is having a doctor shortage.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
you first got to find a regular doctor, then you would refer you to a therapist or a cognitive person who deals specifically with autism.
Yeah.
And then if you can afford the $3,000 or $4,000 ticket price, they can do a couple day assessment. But
Yeah.
again, luckily, very lucky, I did it before I was 18, and I'm
Mhm.
already at those day programs at Queen Alexander. So yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's looking at the diagnosis for the autism spectrum. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, there's so many people that are undiagnosed that
Oh yeah,
trying to find a doctor that will assess them. It can take I mean weeks to months to years. I mean, in many cases, years, and undiagnosed. I mean, well, some people could be on income assistance waiting to be diagnosed to be registered as a medically assessed and designated as a person with disabilities in the province BC or any other province really matter of fact across country, and it can be just anguishing for the person, because then they fall under the criteria from the government saying, well, you need to work, you need to work, you need to get a job because they're under that income assistance threshold. And meanwhile, they have the underlying diagnosis, but they haven't been diagnosed by a doctor. You know what I mean? So
yeah.
it's frustrating, right? And yeah, I mean, what do they do? I mean,
Yeah.
Basically, yeah, they just try. Like again, for example, there's a person who lives in my building who actually also goes to my autism group. I knew them prior to that, and she wasn't diagnosed till well into her 60s.
oh
Like
my gosh,
she had I mean, she struggled her whole life with not wondering. A, because she's a woman, and B, because just back in the day, actually, in fact, I don't know if you know this, back in the day, they used to call autism childhood schizophrenia. They thought it was a version
Oh,
of
wow.
schizophrenia for children.
oh, I
And
did.
so they eventually realized, no, childhood schizophrenia is not the same as that. That's something totally different than regular schizophrenia. And so then they came up with a guy named I'm trying to remember his name. He was a guy who came up with the concept of autism. I think the first early diagnoses were in the 40s, and then later they branched out, as I said, to Asperger's syndrome, which then eventually got folded back in. but a guy named Hans Asperger came up with it like in the 80s or late 80s or something.
Hmm.
And that persisted for a while until I said they got folded it back in. Yeah.
Hmm.
Hmm.
One thing I was going to say, Brent, and I kind of want to table this for both of you to comment on, is and we've talked about this before, is there's no handbook to when you have a disability of any kind, right? There's no handbook like when you're disabled, like like lots of people are born with a disability. Like myself, I have cerebral palsy, and you have your um impairment, your vision impairment, Brent. But there's no handbook, right? And I just find like there like for all of the government programs that are out there, nobody kind of tells you that they're out there. You kind of have to do your own legwork, and that I think that can be a hard thing too. It's like you kind of wish that maybe government would try harder to have more information out there that's readily, because it's just like it's all hidden away. It's like, oh surprise, we have this. Oh surprise, we have this. I mean, but if you don't do your own digging, you'll never find it. It's not like it's readily easy to find, like any of that stuff. And I just wanted to get your comment on that too, Peter, if you've
True.
kind of come across that as well.
Oh, 100%. Yeah,
Yeah,
do you want me to tell you more about some of the stuff that I've had to go through to like work with that?
sure, yeah.
Okay. So luckily, thankfully, unlike some people, my mother was quite aware of these She did a lot of research because she was a stay-at-home. She worked a little bit at the schools. She used to work years ago as a nurse, but she quit that in the 80s. And then she worked a little bit like as at the schools and other places, but she had a lot of time to do stuff. And instead, my dad worked. Thankfully, at the time, there was enough you can live on one salary. And today, that's not possible. But so she worked very little, and she was able to help. And so she knew to research all these programs and get involved and figure it out. But they are, as you said, they're very dug. Like they dug around, and
Hmm.
it falls under other places. Like I don't know if you've ever heard of Inclusion BC. That's another great
Hmm.
organization, and
Yeah.
they are the ones who are it shouldn't be these private organizations doing the research to tell you about like there's a program you can get involved with called disability income. No, it's what's it called? Where you get money, you put money aside, and that's savings for your future. And if
Oh,
you're on disability,
the
but
RDSP, the
yeah,
RDSP.
the
Yeah.
RESP, that's the word.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm
Yeah.
blanking. And but if my mom never told me about it, I would have never known about it. Like it's so
Hmm.
buried, and it's a great program. You can put a little bit of money aside every month, and
Hmm.
then the government will match the contribution for your money. But no, there's no website. I mean, there is, but it's buried. It's not very
Yeah.
well known about it. So as
Hmm.
soon as you go on disability, they don't really give you the information about it. They don't tell you. And then housing is the other thing is they have like a bunch of different types of housing like that you have to get on and it really is a problem when you have a disability like an autism because it's not clear as to where you fit into the housing. So unlike say an obvious disability like a wheelchair or something like that, they would clearly know where to put you. But with
Hmm.
autism, it's like, well, you can feed yourself, so you don't really fit into that place where someone will dress or feed you. But there's another housing, but it's very limited, and there's a lot of other people on the list, and so you got
Hmm.
to wait on these housing lists, and it's
Yeah.
you get on disability, but then you got to pay normal market rent, and that can be
Hmm.
almost impossible. So yeah, it's not well planned. Like they don't
Yeah.
Hmm.
clearly make it easy for people.
They just throw
Yeah.
stuff like up against the wall. It's like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's try this. Bang.
yeah.
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 And I'll give you kind of my overview of it too. And I've mentioned it before on the podcast many times, but I'll just kind of summarize my scenario of growing up. I used to when I was born, I was born actually blind. A lot of people don't know that. I was born blind. My balance was completely off. So they had to teach me how to walk when I was like beyond a toddler. I mean, just a little baby, right? But I was in hospital for 6 months before for observation before they even let me out of the hospital. They were trying to see if I apparently waving their finger in front of me to see if there's any responses. I had no response, which I didn't see. Um, then basically, I guess as I turned after, just over a year old, I was able to start seeing shadows. And I guess my vision kind of teeter-tottered. And I mean, I had an operation, when I was a youngster, but I would walk into walls because I thought like I would be double vision. I thought there was a door handle, and I'd go to open the door in my bedroom, and I'd walk into the wall and fall on the ground, bump my head quite a few times, from bruises here and there. And I still have a welt. Actually, I still have a welt on right here. I'm banging into the wall, indentation. I also got another welt right here from like a little teeter totter that I had, and I flipped off, and I lost my balance. And yeah, I'd always stayed there all my life. But well, with that being said, my mom realized that I was having a lot of vision problems, and so she talked to a top specialist in Canada. Like same as you, Peter. My mom did a lot of research, the best way she could, and she contacted different specialists, and yeah, she found one, and a top doctor, eye specialist, and for surgery, and specialized in my eye condition, and got me to come in. And I loved going to the office because I love to play with the buttons on the and the elevator there, and hit all the buttons on each floor, and up we go.
Were you like Elf, or that
Yeah, yeah,
movie
yeah.
Elf where you lit
Yeah,
up all
yeah.
the
Yeah, that's like, shh.
Yeah.
I said, yeah. So up I went. My mom's like, oh, she got so upset with me, right? She's like, well, it's gonna take forever for us to get to our appointment. But I went in there, and next thing you know it, I went to the hospital. I woke up, and I was very sick. I was very sick for I guess over a week. Um, it got to a point where I got very so sick that I got very dehydrated, and so they had to take me to emerge. So I was in hospital for for a while. They had to give me like an they call it an oxygen tent and stuff, and
Oh no.
yeah, and I had like pneumonia, like or what? Well, borderline, not quite pneumonia, but it was my oxygen level was down. I guess somehow it affected me in different ways. I guess neurologically because I had an eye operation, so they had to move the pupils forward so that I would see straight. And so when I talk to somebody, I look at them straight, but they look, and sometimes if I'm tired or just fatigued, my eyes will twitch back and forth, and that's astigmatism. But it can't be corrected. Like not even laser surgery, no nothing.
Mhm.
Fast forward through life, I went to an eye doctor specialist, and she says, oh well, we just give you laser surgery. It'll correct your vision. You'll get to see 20/20. I said, no, there's no cure for my condition. If that was the case, I would have a cure, but I wouldn't know anything different. I would probably still keep doing my normal routine, take a bus, et cetera, to get around,
Mhm.
because that's what I know in my life. I don't change myself for nobody. But I just learn to live with it. And my mom, as growing up as a single mother, like she brought me up, my brother, and did the best she could. She worked a lot, and she tried to access different services for me. And definitely, having a TA, teacher's assistant, but through the CNIB would come to my house the odd time and bring homework when I was home, bad allergy seasons or whatever, right? But then
Yep.
go to school and same thing, and I just kind of went with the flow in life. But accessing services, I found it very difficult. My mom did for a while as I was growing up. Different subsidies were not available after I turned 18.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, it became obstacle because trying to look at, well, what kind of housing am I going to get into? Am I going to go into like a BC housing at the time, or market housing? There was a long waiting list even back decades ago to get into BC housing. So I decided to rent into market housing, and I was told by my practitioner, "Don't worry, like they're going to." Government told my practitioner at the time, after he diagnosed me with a few different disabilities at the time. I mean, visual impairment, um, Yeah, and then of course, ADHD. But as I went through college, they put me through an assessment that they call an educational assessment, Peter.
Yeah, I had that too. Yeah.
And like it was very in depth. Like it was to determine like, does Brent have autism? Does he have other conditions? Like they were looking for a lot of things. No, they ruled it out, but they said he has a learning disability. And I thinking, oh, I go. So I was upset. I cried. I mean, I think that was natural. Like it's your emotions, right? And because I was having trouble trying to, like, they give you a puzzle, and they give you so much time to basically put this puzzle together in problem solving. And that was what the test was problem solving skills to see how fast you can problem solve a situation. I was having difficulty putting these blocks in. I knew how to do it. I just needed more time, right? And so what they
Yeah.
determined out of the whole thing was it was learning a different. And the doctor I still remember him saying it's a different way of learning, Brent. It's not slow learning. I mean, you have a learning disability, but it's your way of learning. It's more of someone showing you hands on rather than you doing hands on, showing you, and then you doing copying, following.
Well,
And yeah.
I wanted to mention too that a lot of these things are overlapping, you know,
They
like
are.
for example, I mean I don't want to be I don't want to speak in general terms and try to make it too simplistic here,
Mhm.
you know, like you were born with your visual impairment,
Yeah.
and because of that, you know, there's going to be things that are affected from that, and you know, one of those things would be your learning is going to be affected because of maybe not seeing the world in the same way, you
Yeah.
know.
The one
Um,
determined though, Neil, is that they said that was interconnected because of hand and eye coordination. It wasn't fast enough
mhm.
the response. So that's where the learning disability it got kind of intertwined. They said it's always been there.
Yeah.
It wasn't really diagnosed, should we say?
Well, and again, that's exactly like mine too, because like you know, we had a couple shows talking about cerebral palsy, you know,
Hmm.
a couple podcasts, and with my cerebral palsy, you know, I was always, you know, some of the teachers thought that maybe I had trouble learning, but in reality, what it was because of, again, coordination.
Hmm.
Uh, my coordination, because of my cerebral palsy, is slower.
Hmm.
So to be able to write, it takes me longer. So everything slows down because you have to spend longer writing. You have to spend long. So like I'm saying, it's all kind of interconnected, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
it's hard to like say, well, this is because of this, right? Because it's all like there's all little things that connect to other things.
Hmm.
Um, but I wanted to quickly go back to BC housing again, Brent, because you were talking about that.
Yeah.
And you know, I've only tried to do BC housing once in my life, and that was back in my first wife. I think even before we got pregnant with Jake, um, we were looking at BC housing. So it's like a long time ago.
Hmm.
And the one thing that really bothers me about BC housing, I don't know why. I don't know why, for the life of me, I don't know why they can't figure this out. But you know, you do the application, and you don't hear a peep. Like it just goes into like this black hole.
Yeah.
It like literally goes into a black hole, and you never hear from anybody, like nothing. And
Hmm.
it's like, you know, can I follow up on this application? Well, no. You know,
Oh
can I find out anything about this application? No. You know, so you
God.
so you just submit this application, and like, you know,
Hmm.
it could be 5, 10 years. You won't hear anything about the status of it, or whether they've not accepted it. It just kind of, like I said, goes into a black hole, like this oblivion,
Hmm.
abyss of nothing, and you're just supposed to accept that maybe they got it or maybe they didn't, and you know what I mean? Like it's
Hmm.
so stupid. There's no follow up, zero follow up, and it's like And to think of all that money that they're flushing into BC Housing, and nobody can follow up on any file.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
It's really stupid, really stupid.
I mean, here's another ridiculous thing that just came up, and I'll get Peter's take on this.
Mhm.
So the UN just came out with an overview of looking at how Canada is responding to the CRPD. They've now given Canada a real black eye. I'm saying, like, why are you not complying with the CRPD? And they're actually demanding that Canada repeal MAID and also the Canada Disability Benefit, and actually strengthen the regulations to what they were supposed to be when they first honored when it came out with the CRPD. It's like, ouch. Strong recommendations. Of course, they're recommendations again, and that's that key word, because I mean they can be recommendations. I still think they should be making sure that Canada does actually do these things. And anyway, I wanted your view on that. I'm not sure if you've been following that
Oh
information.
yeah,
Yeah. So,
absolutely.
yeah, I just I know it's quite quite appalling, because a lot of the top advocacy organizations across Canada are just appalled too that Canada
Yep.
would actually not even comply. I mean, 5 years later, and again we're still sitting on a pending Canada Disability Benefit, where the DTC is one of the eligibility criteria. So they got rid of that DTC, all PWD in every province and territory would actually qualify. The recipient would qualify. I
But
mean,
not only that, Brent, they have the DTC, but then they have a second application now too
right.
that they're going to force people to do.
Yeah, for the Canada Disability Benefit.
Yeah.
And I know Mike Morris.
So it's application number one and then application number
Yeah,
two. And then maybe,
yeah,
maybe you might qualify for something.
yeah.
Maybe.
Because I know, I mean, before we quickly go over to Peter, but
Mhm.
I know that the Mike Morris for the Green Party of the federal government had in Kitchener, Ontario, was pushing to have it streamlined so that it would automatically go to all PWD, none of the barriers included. And in committee stage, they actually agreed with him. They actually agreed, and he was so happy that yes, I succeeded on some of the key things in the what he wanted to get done. There were some things that he couldn't get done, but he was working to try to get them to implement more in. And again, they just backtracked and said, thanks for the information, but we're going to go this way. And even some of the top advisors to the minister who was in charge at the time, Carla Quantrill at the time, and then it got switched over. They did a bait and switch, right? They switched the Titanic chairs around and put Kamala in there. And of course, she just said, well, But anyway, the fact is that a lot of the provinces were actually waiting on the CDB, saying, well, yeah, well, the federal government's going to do it, so we don't have to raise the rates, because the federal government's they're going to do things the right way. Well, we know that they haven't. So yeah, I want to anyway. I'm not going to ramble on. I get your take on what do you see happening here?
Yeah, exactly as you said. There's two levels of government giving out two different types of money,
Yeah,
and one thought, oh, we're gonna get all this money, so don't worry, we won't need to raise the rates because we'll. And then the other government said, we don't want to give you too much money because they were worried about clawbacks and other problems. So in the end, they gave this poxy $200, which is like, I mean, it's supposed to be a top up. It's not only $200, but still
Ooh.
200 on top of it's still pretty poxy. And in some places, as you said, it doesn't even apply to every single disabled person because one is provincial, one is federal, and it's two different places you have to work with, and it's a real mess. And then some governments are going to claw it back, some governments are not going to claw it back, but it's such a small amount, and it. I mean, they shouldn't even bother to do it because then they could have just said each government provincially could raise the rates to a normal living rate of like whatever they is in that individual province, and then people can live. I mean, it's all well and good to apply for housing that's cheap, but there's only so much low income housing, so it's much easier to just give people the money to cover the cost of housing. I mean, yes, some people worry that they're gonna jack up the rent suddenly because, oh, well, now you have $5,000. They're gonna jack up the rents to $3,000. Like, but I
Mhm.
mean, they're jacking up the rents regardless. They're doing it no matter whether you have money or not have the money. And it almost feels to me like they want you to live in low income housing so
Hmm.
they can like tell you where to live or like determine where you. I mean, mine's okay. It's not like terrible housing. I don't know if you want to know more how I got this housing.
Sure.
Basically, I was like, as I said, my mother was very knowledgeable about these things. So
Hmm.
she got early. She's like, I lived with my parents, and I didn't really need to go out right away when I left high
Mhm.
school. So she said, "Don't." Well, but I was like, she's like, "Get on the housing list." I'm like, "Well, I'm not going to move right away." She's like, "Oh, no, no, don't worry. It could take like 15 years." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, wow, 15 years." I'm like,
Yeah.
better get on quickly. And it
Yeah.
took approximately 12 or so years. I mean, I lost track of time, but
Yeah.
basically, I got on the list. Eventually, my mom, as you mentioned, they don't give you updates. You have to call
Yeah.
in. You have to
Yeah.
call in yourself and ask where you're at, what's going on, where you're at, and there's all sorts of different types of housing to apply for, different
Hmm.
avenues, different organizations. So you have to apply for all of them. And then there's like home share. That's one option. There's this option. There's that option. But it's so hard to like navigate where you fit into what place. And so, yeah, she spent all the time, called in all the time. And 12 or so years later, they said, okay, you have a house. And they don't give you lots of warning. They just give you like literally 30 days. And you're just,
Wow.
that's it. You're ready to go. And if you don't take this, they give you
Yeah.
one or two choices to choose from. Luckily, the place I have was okay. It's close to town. It's fine. And that works well for me. But, and then they just, you get the house and then you have 30 days to go. And luckily, again, I was in a much better position where I lived with my parents. So I didn't have to move out straight, like instantly move into the
Mhm.
place and
Hmm.
move all my stuff in one go. I could take my time.
But
Graduate.
Yeah.
but it
And so
is
that,
but it is stupid, like I said, like that it's like all of a sudden it's like surprise, 12 years later, surprise.
yeah,
And you
exactly.
know, like in my case, like I said, I mean, you try to follow up and it's like, sorry, we're not going to tell you anything. So
Yeah.
it's just your application just sits there, and so you
Yeah.
don't know if anybody's seen it. You don't know what the status is. You know nothing, and you just have to
Mhm.
assume that somebody's looking at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
it's just really stupid, the
Well,
whole
yeah, I
thing.
mean, or even if you're in market housing and you want to move into low income housing under the BC housing umbrella, right? I mean, low income housing. Yeah, according to BC housing, nope, nope, they can't do that. What? You
Nope.
can't do that. And I'm
Well,
like, what?
that's another problem. Can I quickly tell you about that? Is the government only wants to house you when you're not housed. So they
Yeah.
want to house you,
Yeah.
but if you're considered okay, so basically, I was living with my parents, and they asked me, "Are you housed? Will they throw you out of your house?" I'm like, "Throw me out in the street," and it was like, "Well, just stay where you are." I'm like, "For when?" And I'm like, "Till I'm 50, till I'm 60. I can't live with my parents when I'm 60. They'll be in their 90s. Like that would be ridiculous. I can't live.
Mhm.
I can't have a 60-year-old man live with a 90-year-old. So that's insanity. So basically, they want me to be more homeless
Yeah.
before I can get any assistance, or
Mhm.
just wait and hope that my name eventually comes up on the list. And so it's really, and it's even worse, as I mentioned earlier, it's even worse when you think it'd be easier to have a diagnosis like autism versus something else. But in terms of the services, no, because you're not quote unquote disabled enough. So you
Hmm.
have
Yeah.
to be like more disabled before they will actually almost like you got to get you worsen your disability,
Yeah.
then they will look at you and go, well, now we feel like you desperately need these services. So we'll then finally, but as you're waiting for the services, you could worsen your situation and you could get worse. So the government doesn't really want to put a lot of work into preventative help.
I call
I,
it preventative maintenance.
I
Yeah.
think I think
Yeah,
the government wants us to all cut off an arm or something, and it's like now you've proven you're more disabled. That's good. You
Well,
know, you qualify now.
I remember
You've cut off
yeah,
your own arm. You know, great.
I remember back when my family physician had diagnosed me as a permanent disabled person in BC. And I had inquired with him about federal. I said, well, I heard something about federal. And he goes, so this is your disability. Okay. You don't have other disabilities that are going to prevent you from being under the criteria. What the federal government, their requirements are even more stringent than provincial. And I went, and he goes, so he looks at the paperwork and he goes, no, I can't do that, Brent. I can't just make something up that's not true. And as time went on, they became more stringent on their DTC requirements. Like he would not sign off. And he says, I go, doctor, I mean, I could get an RDSP. Well, put money into a savings account. I go, no, they'll top it up. He goes, you need a DTC. You need to be registered under federal in order to do that. In order to do that, you need to have that first in order to get an RDSP, Brent. He goes, I know. He goes, I have other patients too that they do get it and it's hard to get. But he says, I cannot put my profession on the line, and I'm not going to lie to basically make it sound like you have all these other conditions. You don't have celiac disease. You don't have Crohn's disease, because I was talking about all these supplements, Peter. And he goes, so I can't make that happen magically and say, you've got all these conditions. Congratulations, Brent. You get all these supplements. Do you want all these supplements? I go, well, I'd like to have the supplements. He goes, do you want all these disabilities? I go, no. I mean, you could get them. And I mean, in life, I mean, nobody knows the magic card that's out there that, knock on wood, they don't get all these other conditions, because all of a sudden you get them. Oh, now you qualify for one of those supplements. I mean, in his view back then, I mean, this is decades ago, Peter, but he says that just raise the rates up to a standard way of living. And that way people can buy all the stuff that they actually do need, that those supplements say that you need to have the conditions in order to get it. He was a smart doctor. He goes, maybe I should operate on the government. I go, oh man. Like he was fuming, and he goes, I'm a surgeon too. Maybe they need me to operate on their brain, Brent. I'm like, what do you think? I go, I have no comment.
You mentioned supplement. That's a very good example. That's something that the government sees almost as experimental.
Yeah.
And so again, and you mentioned the one thing that's interesting about autism is a lot of people with autism have comorbidities of disability. They have the autism, but it comes with other comorbidities, sometimes gut issues, sometimes depression, sometimes other stuff. And the government is very rigid in what they will and won't cover. And so a lot of these things like special diets, you can apply for like a special diet supplement, but you have to prove you have, again, if you just simply raise the rates to a normal amount, they wouldn't have to waste time. If they give you the money for this special, like a friend of mine had celiac disease and a whole bunch of other kind of chronic health issues, which we don't know why it's more common amongst people with autism, but it could be a combination of two things. One, it could be autism in life is causing these problems, like the daily stress of having autism is causing these problems, or they are just connected we don't really know. There's a lot of misconstrued, but now people need all this stuff. Well, you're now having to pay for all these extra things. It'd be great. Like, I don't think people understand, like, let's say Stephen Hawking, for example. It's wonderful that Stephen Hawking, sadly now he's dead, but he had a talking computer. Well, I don't know about other places in the world, but BC doesn't just give you a talking computer if you have a disability and you need a computer. And sometimes people with autism are nonverbal. Like, I don't know if you understand how a nonverbal autism works. Do you know about that?
I've heard of that. I've heard of that before. Yes, but you can maybe explain that to myself and to.
So basically, I can talk fine, and some people misconstrued. There's a lot of misconceptions that when you have autism, you don't talk enough, which is just a misunderstanding. Going back to the old model of autism, but nonverbal autism means your voice works fine. You can totally, your voice box is perfectly fine. It's that there's a link between the brain and the mouth, and somehow the neural pathways are not completely connecting in such a way, so you wind up not being able to speak. And so some people, like I actually have a my cousin's child has autism,
Mm.
and they found out early because he was not speaking. Like I spoke at a normal age. That's why I didn't get diagnosed till 15. He was diagnosed real early,
Oh.
like 3 or 4, I think, because he
Mm.
didn't speak at a typical age. So they thought, well, that's a little different, and they got him diagnosed. And now they've done cognitive speaking with him, and he started to learn to speak.
Mm.
But if the brain never connects with the mouse, and some people that never happens, they may have to use a talking computer. And that can either be a typing computer or it can have pictures. But that's not just something that you give everyone. They don't just give it to every single person.
Mhm.
You have to go to the doctor, you have to apply. It's quite a process. And so it's all this technology. Like, I don't know if you're aware of this, there's these gloves, right? For people with who are deaf. And if you apparently do sign language,
Yeah.
you can literally sign with the gloves, and it will verbally speak. Because it's great if somebody knows sign language, but most of the world doesn't know sign language. So if they don't know sign language back to you, then you're just hands are just nothing to them. And so
Mhm.
these gloves are great, but it's an experimental thing. And so the government doesn't want to pay for all these experimental treatments or things it needed. And it's even worse when you're an adult, because I don't know, I'll tell you a story. I actually worked for a brief period of time, or a year or so, with a child who actually had autism. They knew their family, and I did a bit of respite care with this kid who had autism. He had autism, I have autism, so we were able to work together. And there was all these money allocated to him because he was 8 years old at the time. But
Mhm.
but but that was none of that's available when you become an adult. So
Yeah.
if you don't get to that point where you use the program well, by the time you're an adult, oh well, you missed your opportunity. It's your window's closed, and we'll give it to someone else. And now your window, it's almost like a window that you have a very limited, finite amount of time to
Mhm.
use this programs. And if you don't get them in time, windows closed, go on your own.
Mhm.
I've got a perfect example too, Brent, where when I was younger and I had a lot of braces, like the metal braces for
Yep.
my legs, because my legs are bent, right? And so the braces would straighten my legs.
Mhm.
But a lot of that stuff was very experimental. Like
Mhm.
when I was younger, you kind of felt like a little bit of a guinea pig. They would just try stuff, and it's like, well, maybe this will work, or maybe this will work. But they would just try stuff, and like you were saying, Peter, they didn't really worry about money because I was still a kid, and it's like, well, let's try it, and if that doesn't work, we'll try something else.
Yeah.
But now that I'm an adult, and a couple of years ago, like everybody knows that I fell and I broke my hip. Well, when I was in the hospital, one of the doctors says, I'll arrange to have a home visit for you for a physiotherapist so you can have some physio when you're at home so you can recover. And I thought, well, that's great, and I'm thinking, wonderful that the government can do this. And you know what it was? I got one session,
Yeah.
because the physiotherapist came to my house and he says, okay, that's it. I'm done. You're on your own. So
Oh.
it was one session only. And it's like, yeah, good luck trying to recover now, and go on your merry way and try your best to recover from the broken hip. See ya.
Oh man.
I mean, that's the difference, right? And it's just, and again, I mean, I don't want to sound like bitter grapes or something, but it really is a really bad disconnect when you can throw money at kids, but it's like as soon as you get an adult and you have an injury or something, it's like, well, we better not throw money, to have people recover properly, from a really significant injury. We can't do that.
Well, that's what happened to me. Like I had to pay for physiotherapy and chiropractic treatment for, geez, 9 months. 9 months of treatments, and I'd go there on a regular basis, and it wasn't free. It wasn't covered. I had to pay it out of pocket, and luckily for me, the doctor struck me a deal where I just had to pay a certain subsidy amount. It was like $40 a visit every time, and it would have been a lot more than that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I was going through like pain and suffering. I couldn't even get out of bed. I remember waking up one morning, I'd injured myself on the job. And of course, I couldn't go back doing that same kind of thing again. Like it was repetitive, and that was it. Like that was it for any repetitive stuff in my life. I didn't realize I took it for granted, I guess, in life that hey, put your mind to it, you can do anything, Brent. I mean, go for it, do it, and I just kept doing it over and over and over. But I mean, it was not to get into specifics of saying because I'm not here to throw the employer under the bus. But it was more about a learning curve for myself of saying, okay, like you cannot do, and it's not worth pushing yourself to the point where you injure yourself to the point where you cause yourself more disabilities to add on to it just because it's the work, right? You know what I mean? And I guess I pushed myself where I thought, well, yeah, I can do this, and yeah, but I remember having pain when I left that day, and okay, like, oh, ouch, like I must have done something. Well, what I did was I had injured myself so bad that I dislocated discs in my spine, fractured, bruised. I mean, like I was in bad shape. I couldn't even get out of bed. Like any movement of an arm or turned, I was like winched in pain. Like tears would come down. I wasn't even crying, but tears would start flowing down. I'm like. So I went in and I got rushed in from a friend of mine at the time who her boyfriend had actually made a call because it was his doctor, and he says, well, get him in here. Can he come in? And so he struck a deal, and I'm always so grateful on that. And so I went in and, I guess looking at what you say is in life, what a person is, who they are, is not what they can do. And I looked at and I really had hurt myself more than I realized. And I look back and say, wow, I mean, when people say they can run a marathon imagine just going through a certain stage in life where all of a sudden something happens, poof, like just like that, like things can happen. It can change a whole outlook in life on person's well-being. And I still at times, I still get some indications of hi, like remember me,
Yeah.
yeah. But it's not to that degree now because it got all snapped back into shape, right? But all the treatment and learning how to move my arm again, Peter and Neo and my listeners, how to move my leg like properly. Like I had to walk, but I had to walk like so slow. My mind says, Brent, you got to move faster. Come on. And I felt like I was moving like a turtle. And I'd go outside of my building, go for a little walk along the sidewalk because they didn't want me to walk too far, but just enough to keep mobile. Right. And a person parked outside of the building, and it was ironic. I thought, okay, someone just parked there reading a book. They turned as soon as I went by. I looked, and I saw in the corner of my eye a flash of light, like a snap, like a picture. I turned around, like, okay, person's taking maybe a picture of the building. Maybe they want to rent there or something. No, they were taking a picture of me. Just to prove that, I guess through insurance purposes, right? So, yeah, and I thought I was isolated, but it wasn't isolated. Like it was more than that. Like I was being surveyed, surveillance every time I turn around. It was like, I see this vehicle in another area, but I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was doing what my doctor told me to do, is to stay limber and because you need to move around, right? And and so I look at all these programs and services that people have to jump through all the hoops. They shouldn't have to do that. Like it should be there as you pay into it through your insurance. I mean, when you work, there's always that premium. It's always automatically put aside. But even if you weren't working, there should be that service for PWD that something happens in their life where that they should actually get some kind of a program where they can just say, yeah, I need this. You don't have to prove why you need it. I need it. Okay, no problem. It's there. There's so many things that need to be changed. Like Jeff would always say, Peter, no less than poverty level financial support, right? And it's true because it needs to be at that. Like that's the most minimum amount across all the provinces. And I mean, governments always have excuses. oh, well, we've got more to do. We just can't do it right now. Fiscal situation, policy, or whatever the excuses are, or we're waiting on the CDB. And I mean, I always say, like, just raise it up. And hey, if the CDB comes along, great. Then they can kind of work with the province. The feds can work with it accordingly. I looked at it just recently. I was reading about at Alberta what they plan on doing. Apparently, their base rate's 1901, and but the minister says, "Oh, well, they're getting way too much. Like we're taking good care of them, so they don't need the CDB. We're going to claw that off." So really, like, so you're supposed to say that that's what they're going to be capped at? Like that's sorry that you can't have any more than that. I mean, God forbid,
Yeah.
right? Market rent and the cost of living's high. I mean, that's for Alberta, and I've learned over time I don't like to pin one province against another province and saying, well, my God, they're getting that much. How come we're not getting that much? I say equality. Bring everybody up to a level.
It should be equal across
Yeah,
the
yeah,
country. Yeah, but
yeah.
with the CDB, um, it goes back to they really should have listened to the advocates because there was a whole bunch of hearings and impact statements from advocates, and there was all that time and energy from really prominent advocates and saying, we want this, can you have to include this. It's like, yes, we'll listen to you, and then the $200 happens, and it's like, well, obviously you're not listening to us at all.
Well, there was two of them that dropped off. I mean, and we know those
Yeah,
two, and
yeah,
yeah, I mean Neil Belangi and Michael Prince.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean they were beyond disgusted. They said it was like a gut punch, and they put so much work and effort into standing up for PWD across Canada and other allies too, who basically gave their input on what do they want to see. I mean, there was doctors on their committee. There was doctors
Mhm.
and I mean nurses, doctors. I mean specialists that said to the government like, let's do it this way, and the government just ignored everybody, and they wanted to do it their way. So what was the point in all that?
Yeah.
And
And like you said earlier too, it's like one thing for the CRPD to like be critical and say,
yeah,
why are you doing this? But unfortunately, it's the equivalent of being slapped across the face with a wet noodle. Like
yeah.
it's almost no. I mean, the governments don't care. Like the provincial government's going to look at the CRPD and the United Nations and go, well, so what? What are you going to do about it?
Well, it's like
So
advocacy groups in BC
yeah.
had mentioned to our provincial government in British Columbia here high recommendations of implementing no less than poverty level. There was a whole bunch of stuff in there, and they completely did a reverse on it. They didn't even focus on any of the recommendations, and that was from 2024.
Hmm.
And one of our guests that we're going to be coming on talking about that be coming up soon. On the show from BC Poverty
Yeah.
Reduction.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And definitely,
Rowan Burge. Rowan
yeah,
Burge.
yeah, that'll be an interesting, very interesting show too, because
Hmm.
the fact is that these recommendations were put in. I mean, these were high recommendations, and they have direct contact with the government on these recommendations. The
Hmm.
government agreed with these recommendations. They said, okay. What did they do? Not even one increase, not even indexing it to inflation. I mean, cost of living, COLA, COLA. But I mean, like, wow, like it's crazy. I mean, there's a lot of talk of saying, well, the last rate increase was in 2 years ago. And I mean, that was only for the shelter portion, but only went to some disabled people. But you look back in the budget, it was actually the last actually increase before then was in 2021. That was the COVID supplement that was left at 175 that was given to all PWD. I mean, even seniors got that, like even seniors and
Mhm.
PWD. And I mean, a whole broad range of population got it. Why? Because they left it on because they realized that it was making a difference in their lives, like in their livelihoods. They could buy nutritional food, other supplements, rent. I mean, if they wanted to put to rent. And so when they came out, when the government came out with it for the 125, I figured it was going to go to everybody. But no, it was only selective. I thought, wow, like,
Yeah.
that was crazy because when I hear in the just people in the neighborhood talk about it too, and I hear on social media people in the neighborhood, and they say, well, the government says, well, but if we raise the shelter, landlords are going to take advantage of it. Well, rents are going high regardless. Like as soon as there's no vacancy control. So as soon as I move out of my unit and say I moved into another unit in my same building, my rent in this unit here would automatically shoot up to no less than $1,800. 1,800 automatically. And the landlord would be like, yay. So I guess my argument I would have with the government on that is lenders are not taking advantage of PWD. They're taking advantage of what the market will bear because that's how it's working. It's gonna be treated as a commodity, but for some reason it is. So.
Yeah.
Well, can I say something? There was an interesting video. It came out recently because a couple last month was well, I guess it was this month. You're still in this month. It was World Down Syndrome Day, and there was a video about a girl who discussed like making sure all the decisions are made with the people involved. They might build. Like back in the day, okay, like here's an example. In one part of the video, a guy's like, if you hear the fire bell, run out of the building. He's like, I'm deaf. Well, what do I do? Like, I hear the touch screen. I'm blind. Well, you don't.
Yeah, I didn't see it.
If the things are made by people who don't have the specific individual disability, then they wind up being not. It doesn't work for that person because they're not part of the process. It would be like if a kid. I mean, kids don't make some decisions themselves because they're too young. But when you get older, you should be making the decisions. You choose what you want to wear. You choose what you want to eat. You should choose if you're capable, if you're mentally capable. But they don't even involve these people. And then what happens is the government goes, oh, well, it didn't work for everyone. We tried to make it work. Well, did you ask people? Did you consult with individual people with disabilities? No. Like a shelf is too high. I have dwarfism. Like I can't reach the shelf.
Yeah.
Well, oops. Oh well, sorry. Well, guess that doesn't work for you. We'll find another job, and then it's like
and with food banks, you mean you don't like 8 cans of tomatoes? Well, no, I'm intolerant to tomatoes.
Yeah.
Oh well, that's too bad.
That's another. I mean, most people with disabilities are going to a food bank, as you mentioned. And that really becomes a problem because and it's really challenging. I find autism almost even more challenging. I mean, I can't say because I only have autism, but it seems to be even more trouble than a physical disability in some way because the government doesn't know what they're doing. Like it's like, okay, you're in a wheelchair. Okay, we'll put in a wheelchair ramp. That's a simple solution. But with a disability like autism, which most people don't understand, and being that it's a spectrum disorder. So it can be very challenging because people might, as you said, you mentioned earlier about the puzzle piece. Well, that's what you see on the internet. If that's all you see, the government's not going to, and if they don't consult with people who have the individual disability, then they just go with a generic formulaic idea, and then the person tries to use it. And it's like trying to fit us. There's actually a group in Seattle that's called this. It's called the Square Pegs Autism Society. And they literally basically like taking a square peg and sticking it in a round hole. I mean, I'm a square peg. I'm going to go into the society as a round hole. Oh, whoops, it's not fit. I'm not fitting in. Oh, well, this is all we offer. We only offer the square pegs. You don't like it? Too bad. Like,
yeah.
And I think it's the policymakers in the government. They don't have lived experience, Peter, and listeners. It's all they live in a bubble, right? And so it doesn't really affect their lives. And they say, oh, well, yeah, oops, I guess we got more to do. And that's the reason why rates don't get increased. I mean, they'll say, we raised the rates all these times, but they didn't significantly raise it because it gives them that leeway to kind of bounce it down the road. And then we've got like their 10-year plan. We're going to raise rates over a certain period of time. And
I love the 10-year plans.
Are they going to go with a 2016 MBM? I mean, wow, like 2016 MBM. I mean, level like that's crazy. That's 9 years ago. That just blows my mind.
We're at the end of the hour, Brent. We're kind of blown past a little bit.
Oh, well, we had so much fun today. I mean, talking about your autism and the autism, like the spectrum. I mean, how it's kind of interconnected, like as an add-on into it. I mean, like how you explain that, Peter, because I learned. See, and that's the thing. We learn from each other.
Exactly.
And I remember when I was in, oh gee, what grade was I in? Yeah, grade 7. They taught us a little bit sign language, right? And they played a song, and it was I'll have to kind of recall that and get back to you on that one. But
No worries.
anyway, there was one where you would actually, I can actually kind of demonstrate. So I put my hand up for people, the viewers, that kind of describing what I'm doing. So I'm putting my hand up, okay, and then I put my hand up on top, basically horizontal across the top of my hand. So what does that mean, Peter?
Time's out.
No, so it's really windy. So
Yeah.
it means treetop.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I didn't even know that. So we got taught that, and we got grilled into us over and over. I wish I would have remembered and a lot more of it, but I remember it's like so the trees will sway, and it says, or I love you.
Yeah.
So yeah, and there's different ways of symbol. Like there's like ways of different letters. Like there's, I mean, I think the standard one, I mean C, you know, and there's different letters and stuff. But just looking at some of these interpreters, when if you watch in the BC Legislature channel, they have an interpreter on there about the letters and like how they describe certain things, or they'll go, you know, like stop is that, right? But treetop, like wind, like yeah, it was interesting. I can just visualize the person's that one brain lapse. See, that's part of it. Anyway, there was one artist came out with different. He was pretty popular back in the 80s.
No worries.
Yeah, anyway, it'll come to me. Sorry about that, folks. But yeah, I was trying to recall
we'll save it for another podcast.
Yeah,
man.
but it'll be good. But I encourage people to kind of look at listen to different songs, and just to interpret, think of how you would describe each song into like a sign language. That's a learning thing for people today. Listen to a song, and actually visualize how your hand would go to different phrases in a song. And that's how I learned the sign language. We learned that in grade 7, and they got up and down each aisle. Your turn. And you're like, what? How do I do this? I can't do this. No, that's fine. And so the teacher would go through and describe to us, well, what is each movement of your hand? What does it represent on like, so if it's a tree, well, I don't know, like Brent, what does a tree do? It stands up and down, right? Yeah. Oh, move your hand. So they put my hand, they grab my hand like this and hold it. And then what is a top? I'm like, oh, neat. And so that's how people who are deaf or visually impaired or sightly impaired, if they have hard of seeing things, or they can't hear too well, or they're fully deaf or partially deaf, that's how they interpret. They got interpreters who will actually help them navigate and participate in society the best way that works good for them. And that's why the key word is works good for them. So them meaning they're the ones who are teaching society. That's what works good for them as an individual. And I always believe that that's how I think government needs to learn that too, from people with lived experience, what works good for them. And we're the teachers. We're the teachers to teach the government that to listen on so many different aspects. Is it accessibility, transit? I mean, when I talked on our last episode about transit, I mean, my gosh, Peter, I mean, it's still a gong show, right? I mean, no transit to Victoria. Like, and I mean, Sonia's mom and dad, I don't understand why it's a simple mode of transportation. Why can't Victoria provide the service? I go, because Cowichan provides it. And Cowichan says, well, we don't need to get Victoria to do it because we provide the service. So it's one hand throws it against the other hand, but nobody wants to deal with that, right? But Transdev, I mean, they're a company that's a Canadian arm and they're actually main companies in France. Go figure. Yeah. France.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
They got French fries.
Should I say like a wrap up or?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. Well, I just quickly say, wrap up, is it's, as I said, autism awareness, autism, well, it's not used to be called Autism Awareness Day, sorry. Autism, Worldwide Autism Day is coming up on April 2nd. Very important that you listen to people who actually have autism. And if the organization is not involving people with autism, wonder why or ask questions or really get them involved and hear from the actual autistics because it's their day. And that's the key. And the entire month technically was sort of Worldwide Autism Month of April, but because it was started in the States, it's kind of sort of in Canada. October is sort of our Canadian one, but most people think of it because of the States and social media. So the whole month is sort of Autism Awareness Month. But autism can be any time of the year, really. Just really listen, just hear what they have to say, and don't get involved in any practices or organizations that are actually not involving or listening or doing anything with actual people who actually have the actual autism diagnosis. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Peter.
No problem.
Love to have you on again, and we'll talk about
Sure,
autism or any topic that you want to talk about, things
Sure.
that are affecting your life on a day-to-day basis. Whatever topic.
Nice.
Yeah. And I want to thank our viewers and our listeners on our podcast for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed another wonderful episode of one of our podcasts that is always entertaining because we always have new ideas and different stories of lived experience. That affects everybody. Because, if you don't have a disability, you will develop a disability of some sort in your life. You're born with disabilities or one disability, and it multiplies in time. But hearing impacts, the stories of how it affects people's lives, it's so important to get involved in the community, of connecting with people with disabilities and learning from them. It's all a learning curve, and government. I really encourage you to really across the country to really start listening more carefully from people with disabilities and advocacy groups. Allies, people's families, their mothers, their fathers, brothers, sisters. Why can we not just take care of each other, right? As society, not pin disabled against disabled, not saying that people should have less because they have a disability. You can't work. Oh, well, then you're not part of society. I'm sorry. There's something wrong in the government. You got to stop that narrative, right? It's old, it's stale, it's not working. Just treating people with respect, right? Listen to their lived experience stories. Be in their shoes for a while, live their life for a while. And I tell you, look at the welfare challenge. They happened way back in the 1980s and 90s. It didn't last too long now, did it?
Yeah.
Listen back to how Biff Naked, we had her on the show. She talked about that way back when on a podcast. Look back at some of the articles. I think there's so much that we need to learn from each other, and government needs to learn from us. It's a mutual understanding, and I think that's how things are going to change. As the world evolves right now, there's so much uncertainty going on. Number one is I hear a lot of disabled across Canada and in British Columbia. Everybody's struggling. People that had six-figure salaries, they're now being dismissed from their occupation. They now don't have income. And there's so many downfalls that are happening. And I'm not here to be doom and gloom, but it now makes people realize that what people with disabilities are going through. Because before they're like, oh, you're disabled. Now I hear a lot of people are saying, hey, I didn't know that's how the government's treating people. Right. So it's like a wake-up call. And I think there's an opportunity of bringing in our rates to no less than poverty level financial support. That's the bare minimum, and then add on when you have a disability. So when we had CERB, right, we know how fast that came out. Wow, it came out that quick, very quick. And I think that's basically a sign of how things are going to have to change, because with the carbon tax ending, final payments on Friday, April the 4th, across the country. So people that were getting carbon tax credits, that's ending, but it was only zeroed out down to zero. So meaning that people are not going to be paying that carbon tax. However, they will be paying that carbon tax going forward in one way or another. But people with disabilities or low income, they're going to have a huge impact because that's a loss of income, a huge loss of income on the quarterly payments from the federal government, right? It was by the provincial, but got administered by the federal government, put out there on your GST. So that was something to look forward to. Now with the government not increasing rates also and waiting on the CDB, people who do not qualify for the CDB because they can't get a DTC, that's another a problem. So I think what I'm recommending before we end the podcast, what I'd like to say is, get Peter, just your final comment on this.
Yeah.
I want to see the government actually amend the BC budget and actually bring the rates up. At least if you can't bring it up to poverty level financial support, at least bring it up to like another $500 above. Like, I mean, on a permanent basis right across, and work from that point on and bring up the poverty level and tie it to cost of living. I'd like to see it up to no less than poverty level. I know that the government's going to have a huge hole in their budget of about a $2 billion shortfall because of getting rid of the carbon tax. However, the government should not have counted on that because it should have been revenue neutral in the first place, right? So the government has lots of other revenue streams it can tap into. Anyway, what would dollar figure if you had something to say to the government right now, Peter? What would you say about raising rates?
Obviously, raise the rates to, as you said, poverty level. Obviously, I don't think they're going to just suddenly add in $1,000 tomorrow.
No.
You have to be slow increases.
Yeah.
But any amount, even a couple $100, is a lot considering when you're really, really rich. Couple of dollars seems like nothing, but when you're living paycheck to paycheck or your disability check to disability check, that's a lot. That seems like a little bit, but that might be the difference between getting a quality meal or a fast food shitty like box meal that it's not as quality or going to a food bank. So yeah, just they obviously eventually raise it to a level that coincides with housing and all the expenditures everyone has to spend, but in the interim, just little increments as much as you can get within a reasonable amount and promise people this as soon as possible. Yeah.
Basically,
And don't wait for some policy, don't wait for some election, don't wait for some CRB benefit. Don't just do it. Just done.
Yeah, just get it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. I always say just do it. Do it. Do it. yeah, that favorite line, eh? Yeah. Because people are just so distraught. And I mean, when I looked at the BC budget when it came out, I mean, zero. I'm thinking, wow. I know we talked about it on the podcast before, and I said, well, what did we say? Oh, I think they're going to do zero. Yeah. They must have thought, well, okay, well, they said they're going to be zero, so let's just do zero. Wow. I mean, that was like a slap on the face. So again, yes, government lived experience, what I just said, what Peter said, and what a lot of our other viewers and listeners would say the same thing. You can change the budget, you can amend things. I know things can get changed on the fly, just like that. I was told that by some other politicians, by the way. So yeah. Anyway, thank you everyone for tuning in. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode. We covered a lot of topics, and we are specialized on focusing on autism because it's so important to look at the person for who they are, Don't judge them, and because autism, like as Peter, as you would probably indicate, it's not like a hidden disability, is it? Like it, but it's like not, it's invisible, like, but it's there, but it's not physical, like you don't see it.
It can be, but it's neurological in the brain.
That's what I
mean. It can lead to physical down the road.
Yeah, it can lead to that. And I always say never judge person for basically what they can and cannot do. Just judge, just take them for who they are. Just take them for who they are. And bingo on that one. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I hope you enjoy your day and stay tuned to our next episode coming up soon. Thank you.
And I did want to say we've got a couple of kind of very unique and special episodes coming up.
Oh,
So make sure you're subscribed if you're not already, and then you'll get notified because there is um the next one coming up is a really unique opportunity for us. I mean, it could get pushed to a later date, but I think we're still on schedule to have it on Friday.
hmm.
But yeah, you'll everybody will know more if they are subscribed. They're like, oh wow, this looks interesting. Yeah, and so it's going to be a really cool one, and we're getting more and more kind of unique and special opportunities on the podcast here, and this is one of them that's coming up. So yeah, looking
Yeah,
forward to
there's
it.
one thing that Neil and I have mentioned on the podcast is if you want to come onto the show, rather than us contacting you, if you want to come onto the show and you want to shine your lived experience stories with us and share it with everybody else, definitely reach out to us. We'd love to have you on. I mean, our goal this year is to get prominent politicians on from all different parties. Don't be shy. Reach out to us. I mean, we're not going to want to keep chasing you. You come in and say, "Hey, this is what I want
I
to."
still will, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Rather than the cat chasing the mouse and the mouse
yeah,
chasing the cat.
yeah.
If the show is on Friday, this Friday, it'll be a bright and early one. Oh
It's
yeah,
really, really early, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, that's another thing too, is it's probably going to be a pre-recorded anyway. So we're going to be up early, and then it's going to be released later in the day.
Hmm.
But you know, Dan's in chat, I think, still, and he's kind of involved with it. So,
Oh, okay,
but
yeah.
I don't think we'll kind of know for sure if it's happening until maybe maybe tomorrow or Wednesday.
Hmm.
We'll
We'll have a
we'll
better idea.
we'll have a better idea. But it
But
is coming. It is
yeah,
coming though.
definitely. And
Yeah,
when it does come, stay tuned to that episode
yeah,
because it's going to be really good.
yeah.
Again, you need to subscribe to the channel, share the content, like it. I mean, just blast it out there. Reach out to us if you want to come on. Lots of opportunity to talk about. I mean, so many different topics. I mean, like today's episode, talk about autism. I mean, is it accessibility that you like to talk about? Is it about housing? Is it about fragrances? Is it about maybe there's laundry detergent that really affects it and causes a lot of allergic reactions? I mean, is it straws? I mean, plastic straws, paper straws. I mean, I remember that episode. I mean,
Yeah.
was it buses? I mean, everyone knows I love to talk about transit. I mean, there's so many different topics to talk about. So yeah, definitely. Is it government? What bothers you about government? Oh man, I
Lots.
think I just got a lot of people saying, "Hey, I want to come on." Hey,
Yeah.
that's a hot topic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So definitely stay tuned, everyone, and I hope you enjoy your day, and we'll talk to you very soon. Stay
Cheers.
tuned. Thanks, Peter.